The US just positioned this around Iran, and it's bigger than anyone realizes. This week, the United States quietly positioned two of the most powerful aircraft carriers on Earth within operational reach of Iran. You will be shocked when you find three facts about this. Number 1. USS Abraham Lincoln. At the center of the deployment is the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier carrying an air wing of F-35 stealth fighters and F/A-18 Super Hornets. Surrounding it, a constellation of Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers and at least 2 attack submarines. According to leaked American assessments, the ships in this strike group carry hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles, long-range, precision-guided weapons capable of striking targets deep inside Iranian territory from hundreds of miles away. That naval force alone gives the United States the ability to open a sustained air and missile campaign from the first moment, without a single aircraft taking off from a land base, without a single soldier crossing a border. But the Navy isn't alone. Air defense systems have been deployed across approximately 20 American bases throughout the Middle East. THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, and Patriot missile batteries are now operational at installations across the Gulf states, providing layered defense against Iranian ballistic missile retaliation. These systems aren't for offense. They're for survivability. They're positioned to absorb whatever Iran throws back, and to keep American forces operational throughout a sustained engagement. A massive airlift pipeline is moving troops and equipment from the United States and Europe to forward bases in the region. Over 100 C-17 Globemaster transport flights have been logged, each one carrying heavy equipment, vehicles, ammunition, and personnel. Forces have been deployed to positions on the Turkish-Iranian border and in Armenia, jump-off points that give the U.S. access to Iran's northwestern frontier. And America's allies are moving too. Britain has deployed 6 F-35 fighter jets to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, alongside other air assets already stationed there. The stated purpose is strengthening the defense of British bases and Allied territories in case the region deteriorates. But the practical effect is that NATO-capable strike aircraft are now positioned within combat range of Iranian targets. And then came the detail that military analysts flagged as the most significant signal of all. After the first round of talks in Oman, within hours of the negotiations ending, 2 of Trump's most senior envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, boarded a helicopter and visited the USS Abraham Lincoln. They stood on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, bristling with strike aircraft and cruise missiles, a ship positioned within striking range of Iran, and they were photographed there, intentionally, publicly, for the world to see. That wasn't a photo opportunity. That was a message. But the Lincoln was only the first piece. And when you see what arrived next, and what 2 carriers operating together actually means, you will understand why this positioning represents something the region has not seen in years. Because the second carrier is not just more of the same. It is a force multiplier that changes the entire calculus. Then something even bigger began moving. The USS Gerald R. Ford. If the Lincoln is the southern anchor, the Ford is the weapon that turns a deployment into a siege. It is the most advanced aircraft carrier ever constructed. Not an upgraded version of an older design. A completely new class of warship. The first of its kind. A generational leap in naval warfare that cost over $13 billion to build and carries capabilities that no other vessel on Earth can match. Over 100,000 tons of displacement. Nuclear-powered, meaning it never needs to refuel and can operate at sea for over 20 years without returning to port for reactor servicing. Over 5,600 crew members. And an air wing that includes the most advanced combat aircraft in the American arsenal. But nothing. The Ford's air wing includes F/A-18E Super Hornet strike fighters for precision ground attack and air-to-air combat, F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, the carrier variant of the most advanced combat aircraft on Earth, capable of penetrating the most sophisticated air defense networks in the world without being detected. EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft that can jam, blind, and disable enemy radar and communication systems, creating corridors of silence through which strike packages can pass uncontested. E-2D Hawkeye advanced airborne early warning aircraft that provide persistent surveillance over hundreds of miles of battle space, feeding real-time targeting data to every platform in the strike group. And MH-60 Seahawk helicopters for anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue, and logistics support. That is one ship's air wing, one floating airfield carrying more combat power than the entire air force of most nations on Earth. The crew has been at sea for months. They are experienced. They are operationally seasoned. This is not a carrier on its first deployment working out technical problems. This is a combat-tested strike group that has been operating under real-world conditions for the better part of a year. Around February 12th, the Ford was redirected to the Middle East. Now, let me reassemble the full picture. Because the individual deployments reported in the news, a carrier here, a destroyer there, a squadron of jets moved to a base in Spain, obscure the scale of what has actually been constructed. When you put every piece on the same map, the word that emerges is not buildup, it is encirclement. Here is where the diplomatic and military tracks converge in a way that compresses every decision into a shrinking window. President Trump originally indicated roughly 10 days for Iran to reach a meaningful nuclear agreement. He then adjusted this to 10 to 15 days maximum. That window opened around February 19th, which means the deadline falls somewhere in early March 2026. But U.S. officials have clarified that strike readiness already exists. The targeting packages are prepared, the air bridges are established, the command and control infrastructure is operational. The force does not need 2 weeks to be ready. It is ready now. But the timeline is only half the equation, because the other half is Iran's response. And Iran is not capitulating. Iran is defying. And that defiance, as you will see in the next discovery, is what transforms a standoff into a powder keg. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, Chief Mohammad Eslami, declared publicly that no country can deprive Iran of its nuclear enrichment rights. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei called uranium enrichment an undeniable right, and Iran's ballistic missiles essential for deterrence. President Masoud Pezeshkian vowed that Iran will not bow to pressure. These are not the statements of a government preparing to comply. These are the statements of a government that has made its decision and is communicating that decision to the world. And the actions matched the words. On February 19th, Iran hosted joint live-fire naval exercises with Russia in the Gulf of Oman and near the Strait of Hormuz, ship seizure simulations, vessel ramming practice, anti-ship missile drills, coordinated air, sea, and special forces operations. Iran issued formal notices to airmen restricting flights over Iranian airspace during the exercises, consistent with cruise missile activity. Iran also conducted separate exercises, the Smart Control of Hormuz Strait drills, practicing missile strikes oriented toward the waterway that carries 20 to 30% of the world's oil supply every single day. This is not de-escalation. This is defiance. A defiance broadcast to the world through state television, reinforced through military exercises, and backed by an alliance with a nuclear-armed superpower that is practicing war alongside them. And here is what makes this defiance structurally dangerous. And this connects directly to Discovery 8. When one side positions overwhelming force and the other side refuses to yield, the standoff does not resolve through patience. It resolves through escalation or capitulation. And Iran has publicly removed capitulation from the table, which means the only remaining variable is the form the escalation takes. But before we get to the prophetic implications, you need to understand what a strike on Iran would actually look like, because this is not 2003. And the difference between what happened then and what would happen now is the difference between invasion and precision destruction. Here is what most people get wrong about the current positioning. They compare it to 2003 and assume the United States is preparing for another Iraq, another invasion, another occupation, another decade-long ground war. That is not what is happening. There is no buildup of U.S. ground forces that would indicate a ground invasion. No armored divisions staging in Kuwait. No infantry brigades deploying to forward operating bases. No invasion corridors being constructed. Before we look at Ezekiel, we need to start where Jesus started, because he did not leave us guessing about what the world would look like before his return. He described it in detail, on a specific mountain, to a specific audience, and the precision of what he said should stop every person watching this right now. His disciples came to him privately, not the crowds, not the Pharisees, his closest followers. And they asked him a question that has echoed through every generation since. Matthew 24:3. Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? They wanted to know the signs. They wanted to know what to watch for. And Jesus answered them, not with vague spiritual generalities, not with abstract theology, with specific, observable, recognizable conditions that would characterize the world before his return. And the very first condition he described is the one unfolding on your screen right now. Matthew 24:6-8. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Now look at what happened this week through the lens of those words. Not loosely, precisely. Wars. The largest military positioning in the Middle East since 2003. 2 nuclear-powered supercarriers within operational reach of Iran. Over 120 warplanes surged to 8 regional air bases. Tomahawk armed destroyers in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Persian Gulf. 800 potential combat sorties per day. A force that retired Navy experts say could destroy 100% of Iran's military. And a precedent already set. In June of 2025, American B-2 bombers struck Iranian targets in a 12-day conflict. The war is not hypothetical. it has already happened once, and the force assembled now is orders of magnitude larger than what was used then. Rumors of wars. A 10 to 15-day ultimatum from the President of the United States. Public statements that a strike could come at any moment. Satellite imagery tracking carrier positions broadcast on social media. Ship spotters photographing the Ford crossing the Strait of Gibraltar. News anchors dissecting strike scenarios in real time. And then Jesus said something that most people rush past too quickly. The end is not yet. He separated the signs from the conclusion. He said, "You will see these things. Wars, rumors, nations rising, kingdoms clashing. But the end is not yet. These are the beginning of sorrows." In the original Greek, the word translated as sorrows is odin, which means birth pains, labor contractions, the specific, intensifying rhythmic pain that precedes the birth of something new. That metaphor is not decorative. It is structural. Birth pains do not arrive once and stop. They come in waves, each wave stronger than the last, each wave closer to the next. The frequency increases, the intensity increases, and each contraction is a sign not that the birth has happened, but that the birth is approaching. The pain is not the event. The pain announces the event. So when you see military buildups escalating beyond anything in 20 years, and nuclear timelines compressing to weeks, and alliances forming between nations that Ezekiel named by name, and ultimatums shortening from months to days, and carrier strike groups converging on a single theater, you are not seeing the end. You are seeing birth pains, contractions that are increasing in frequency and intensity, each crisis closer to the next, each one more severe than the last, each one pointing toward something that has not yet arrived but is unmistakably approaching. The purpose of recognizing the signs is not anxiety. It is readiness, not fear, faithfulness, not panic, preparation. And that preparation is spiritual, not military. Because the one who told you these things would happen is the same one who holds every carrier, every missile, every ultimatum, and every outcome in his hand. He is not surprised by the buildup. He described it 2,000 years before the first aircraft carrier was laid down. And discernment now requires us to look at what Ezekiel wrote about the nation at the center of this military encirclement. Because that nation is named directly by its ancient identifier in a text that is 2,600 years old. Now we open the passage that has made this week's headlines impossible for students of Scripture to ignore. Because Ezekiel chapter 38 does something that almost no other prophecy in the Bible does. It names modern nations directly by their ancient identifiers. And the nation at the center of the largest military encirclement in over 2 decades is one of them. Ezekiel 38:5. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, written in the Hebrew text as Paras. The ancient Persian Empire occupied the exact geographical territory that modern Iran occupies today. The heartland of Persia was centered in what is now the Fars province of Iran. The name Persia was the nation's official international designation in diplomacy, on maps, in treaties, and in everyday usage until 1935, when Reza Shah Pahlavi formally requested the international community to refer to the country as Iran. But in the prophetic scriptures, Persia and Iran are one and the same. There is no scholarly debate about this identification, not among premillennial scholars, not among amillennial scholars, not among postmillennial scholars. not among dispensationalists or covenant theologians. And here is the historical detail that most people miss, and it deepens the significance of this identification enormously. In Ezekiel's day, Persia was not Israel's enemy. Persia was Israel's liberator. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, conquered Babylon in 539 BC and issued a decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. The prophet Isaiah, writing before Cyrus was even born, called him God's anointed. Isaiah 45:1. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. Persia freed Israel. Persia funded the rebuilding of the temple. The relationship between Israel and Persia in the 6th century BC was not hostile. It was favorable, providential, an instrument of God's restoration. So when Ezekiel, writing in that same era, described a future moment when Persia would be part of a hostile military coalition marching against Israel, the prophecy would have seemed incomprehensible to his contemporaries. It would be like a prophet in 1945 predicting that the United States and Great Britain would one day be at war. The relationship was too strong. The alliance was too deep. The reversal was too unthinkable. And yet, here we are, 26 centuries later, of this reversal, 2,600 years before it happened. And he did not describe Persia as a passive observer. He described it with shield and helmet. That is military language. Active participation. A nation armed and marching. A nation prepared for war. A nation in formation alongside allies. And those allies are what make the next part of this prophecy so striking. Because Persia is not alone. It is part of a coalition. And when you see who else is in that coalition and what those nations are doing together right now, the alignment between the ancient text and the current moment becomes impossible to dismiss. Ezekiel 38, 2-6. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Let me trace these names on a modern map. Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. This is the leader of the coalition. And Ezekiel gives a geographical marker that narrows the identification to a single axis. Ezekiel 38:15. And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty army. The far north, the uttermost parts of the north. The ancient historian Josephus identified Magog with the Scythians, nomadic peoples who inhabited the regions north of the Black Sea, territory that corresponds to modern Russia and Ukraine. Meshech and Tubal are ancient regions in what is now central and eastern Turkey, but the prince who rules over them comes from the uttermost north. Take a globe. Place your finger on Jerusalem. Draw a line directly north. It passes through Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, the Black Sea, and arrives at Moscow. No other major world capital sits as precisely due north of Jerusalem as Moscow does. Russia, the leader of the coalition, coming from the far north. And on February 19, 2026, Russian warships were conducting joint live-fire naval exercises with Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Not in theory, not in a diplomatic communique, in the water, with missiles. This week, Persia, Iran, named directly. The nation whose nuclear program has provoked the largest military buildup in the Middle East in over 20 years. The nation that declared this week that no country can deprive it of its enrichment rights. The nation at the center of the ring, Kush, translated as Ethiopia in many English Bibles, but in the ancient world, Kush referred to the regions south of Egypt, modern Sudan, and parts of East Africa. Sudan has maintained periods of military cooperation with Iran and has served as a conduit for Iranian weapons shipments to proxies in the region. Put Libya and possibly broader North Africa. Libya has been in a state of fragmentation since 2011. Gomer. The first-century historian Josephus identified Gomer with the Galatians of Asia Minor, corresponding to modern central Turkey, Togarma of the North Quarters, Eastern Turkey, Armenia, and the Caucasus region. The phrase North Quarters reinforces the northern orientation of the entire coalition. And then the final phrase, and many people with thee, unnamed allies, additional nations joining the coalition as it assembles. Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, Sudan, and many others, written 2,600 years ago. Now look at the current geopolitical map. Russia and Iran conducting joint military exercises. Russia supplying Iran with advanced air defense technology. Iran supplying Russia with Shahed military drones used in Ukraine. Turkey maintaining strategic ambiguity between its NATO membership and its deepening relationships with both Moscow and Tehran. Russian military forces operating in Libya. Sudan's complicated history of cooperation with Iranian proxies. The nations Ezekiel named are cooperating militarily, economically, and strategically in ways that did not exist a generation ago. The coalition is not theoretical. It is forming, in real time, in front of the entire world. But now comes the part of this prophecy that demands the most honesty. Because Ezekiel does not just describe the coalition, he describes the condition under which the coalition strikes. And that condition has not been met. Ezekiel 38:4. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army. Before we address the condition, notice the mechanism. Hooks in the jaw. God describes himself dragging these nations toward confrontation. They do not fully choose it. Forces beyond their control pull them forward. Ultimatums that cannot be accepted. Military buildups that demand a response. Alliances that deepen with every new crisis until disengagement becomes impossible. National pride that prevents any leader from backing down. Nuclear timelines that compress every decision into an ever-shrinking window. Look at this week and tell me the hooks are not visible. A 10 to 15-day ultimatum. An armada encircling Iran. Demands for total dismantlement that Iran's regime cannot survive accepting. Hooks in the jaw. Nations being dragged forward by forces they did not fully choose and cannot fully control. But the condition, Ezekiel 38:11. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. The invasion occurs when Israel is dwelling securely, at rest, in unwalled villages, without bars or gates. A nation that has let its guard down. A nation that believes the threat has passed. A nation at peace. That is not Israel today. Not remotely. Israel is on high alert across every front. Missile defense systems are activated. The IDF is at maximum readiness. Northern border forces are deployed against Hezbollah. Preemptive strike planning against Iran is underway. The Prime Minister has publicly declared that Israel is prepared for any scenario. This is a nation bracing for impact, not resting in peace. And that distinction is prophetically critical, because it means the current moment, as dramatic and as aligned as it is not the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. The coalition is assembling. The hooks are tightening. The nations are aligning. But the one condition that must exist before the invasion occurs has not been met. Israel is not dwelling safely. This is not fulfillment. The invasion has not come. God has not intervened with earthquake and fire and brimstone. The coalition has not descended upon the mountains of Israel. But consider what would need to happen for the condition to be met. A peace agreement, a security guarantee, a multinational covenant that convinces Israel the threat has been addressed. Perhaps a deal that degrades Iran's nuclear capability enough for Israel to lower its defenses. Perhaps a broader framework that brings temporary stability to the region. Perhaps exactly the kind of pressure-backed, multinational agreement that the current military positioning is designed to produce. The stage is being set. The actors are positioning. The alliances are forming. The hooks are tightening. But the curtain has not risen. And the one condition that would raise it is the one thing the current crisis could potentially create: a moment of perceived security for Israel. When Persia stands defiant, students of Scripture take note, not because this is the moment, but because the pattern that leads to the moment is visibly, undeniably, and rapidly assembling. And the gap between where we are and where Ezekiel says the invasion begins has never been narrower.